The Sega Dreamcast gained a reputation very quickly as a fighting game console. But going week to week, it turns out that a lot of that rep was built on the fact that they put out 8 fighting games among the first 29 releases, a tidal wave of a single genre. But those 8 fighting games all had drastically different tones and styles. From the all-encompassing mastery of Soul Calibur, the wild arena chaos of Power Stone, the dour gore of Mortal Kombat Gold, the overwhelming process release of Marvel vs. Capcom, the razor-sharp 2D insularity of King of Fighters Dream Match 99, the complicated narrative beats of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, and whatever the flying Psychic Force 2012 was going for. We also had Virtua Fighter 3 TB, a generation-old upscale which I felt paled in comparison to the gorgeous and complex things the games around it were doing. But for our first fighting game in over 6 months, the first since that early flurry of releases, we get a game from a franchise whose stated goal was Virtua Fighter's doing really well. Why don't we have a Virtua Fighter? Tomonobu Itagaki graduated college with a law degree in 1992, but got his first job in the games industry, joining major developer Tecmo as a graphics programmer. He contributed to several big games through the 16-bit era, but his first true career breakthrough came when Tecmo management, dealing with financial hardships, came through and, in typical management style, made a request for our version of the most popular game on the market, only better. Itagaki has joked in interviews that the request wasn't even specifically for a fighting game, saying if he had come up when Gran Turismo was out, it would have been a racing game instead. He got to work on Virtua Fighter but better, utilizing the same graphical engine and structure of VF2, and brainstormed ways to make his game stand out in a crowded market. Itagaki founded his own development studio division of Tecmo for the project, called Team Ninja, and they figured out 2 specific innovations for their new game, which they called Dead or Alive. Their first move was to fine-tune the controls. Their chief innovation was turning the traditional guard button into a grab, to counter at the right moment and hold opponents' limbs against them, to keep players from just spamming singular moves without being punished, which differentiates the series' style from its competitors and peers. The other thing they decided on to differentiate the Dead or Alive series is, in so many ways, the thing that defines its legacy to this day: the jiggle physics. Itagaki had his team focus on being provocative, saying that he felt that sexuality and violence were necessary to truly constitute entertainment, and to get attention for their work. So Dead or Alive features copious amounts of silly, exaggerated, bouncing breasts for every female character. It certainly got attention, but even in the nascent days of 1996, most reviewers regarded it embarrassingly, excusing it or dismissing it, but either way having to get it out of the way so they could talk about how excellent the actual fighting is: sharp, complex, and responsive. I said back on the King of Fighters episode that the narratives of most fighting games have, if anything, the barest of plots. Some kind of a vague tournament to get everybody fighting. And Dead or Alive definitely fits that bill. It tells the story of a corporation called Doatech, which hilariously stands for Dead or Alive Tournament Executive Committee, hosting a worldwide fighting competition, and every fighter has 1 or 2 plot points that say why they want to succeed. An old man providing for his sick granddaughter, a Russian mercenary hired to kill Doatech's CEO, a flamboyant American pro wrestler, a ninja searching for the man who crippled her brother. In typical fighting game style, one of these characters is just an impression of Bruce Lee. Also, inexplicably, one of the fighters is Ryu Hayabusa, the protagonist of the Ninja Gaiden series, who's just here? He's friends with another character's brother? Either way, Dead or Alive was a huge hit, and a sequel was greenlit. For Dead or Alive 2, Itagaki's main focus, his main area of improvement, hysterically, was on perfecting the jiggle physics. And working on cutting-edge Naomi hardware, designed a physics engine specifically for the breasts. Pretty much every character returns, and we add a few more wacky folks, including a martial artist with amnesia, the Doatech leader's daughter, who's a French opera singer, and a clone of the Revenge Ninja. The plot gets more weird details, and trying to play it as a relative newbie, I found its narrative cutscenes essentially completely impenetrable. Especially for as comically short as DOA 2's story mode is, made even shorter by the fact that each matchup is only one round. So you win, and you move on. It's also very generous with continues, almost like beating a boss in an action game, more than opponents in a fighting game tree. The creators were constantly tinkering with DOA 2, and released the Millennium Arcade Edition on the Dreamcast, adding a versus and sparring mode, as well as a team battle mode, which, as I've discussed on that King of Fighters episode, was all the rage at the time. Shortly thereafter, an updated DOA 2 came out as a PS2 launch title in Japan, followed by a European Dreamcast version with new costumes, including a Shadow Man costume. Then they put out another Japanese Dreamcast version called the Limited Edition with even more stuff. And then in the fall, put out DOA 2 Hardcore, which became the most widely available version, which had new characters, stages, costumes, and graphics. There were several other versions with minor changes after that, but Hardcore became known as the definitive version. DOA 2 was the last DOA game to release on a Sony system until the 2010s, so I came to this series as a relative novice, not having any real experience with the franchise, and mostly knowing it for the embarrassing, sexist cheesecake reputation overshadowing it, especially culminating in 2003's Dead or Alive Extreme Beach Volleyball, which was somehow narratively canon while being a gawky, M-rated game that took all the female characters, put them in bikinis, and made them jump around a bunch in slow motion. So I was honestly pretty surprised to find that DOA and DOA 2 were complex, layered, technically involved fighting games. They didn't make enough of a unique impression on me to put them ahead of the very similar Tekken series that I grew up playing, and it certainly doesn't match up to the all-world everything of Soul Calibur. But its fighting is really good, so it's a bit of a shame that its deliberate, creator-intended legacy mostly stops at the belly button. Next time, please make sure you deposit all weapons and metal in the bin, 'cause this is gonna get messy.